So the book basically takes up the problem of why do we think that war is temporary when war doesn't seem to end? We tend to think that there are two kinds of time, wartime and peacetime, and history consists of moving from one kind of time to the other, from wartime to peacetime to wartime. Sort of built into that structure, wartime is by definition temporary. Wartime always comes to an end because after all it's followed by peacetime when there isn't war. That way of thinking about wartime is embedded in works on the history of American civil liberties, on the history of American law, on thinking about American politics, the history of American politics, that certain times are wartime and other times are peacetime. Scholars who write about the impact of war on rights and liberties during the 20th century tend to look at World War I, World War II, a truncated version of the Cold War, and Vietnam. So what's wrong with that? Well, if you look at all American military deployments during the 20th century, you see that there's so much missing from that timeline. The U.S. was involved in military action against the Philippine independence movement long after the Spanish-American War at the beginning of the 20th century. The U.S. was engaged in Asia, in Latin America, all over the world at different points in time, so that if you look at all U.S. military engagements, times when troops were deployed somewhere using weapons and fighting was going on with opposing forces, that looks pretty much like a war to me. When you look at all of these military engagements, it's actually hard to find any peace on the timeline in the 20th century. So we have this conception of the experience of war in American history, that war is confined to time and always followed by peacetime, but we actually have this experience of much more ongoing military engagement with large and smaller military engagements, so that the concepts of wartime and peacetime don't really work. One of the things interesting post 9/11 is scholars, they give up the language of wartime and peacetime, but what they do is they just call it something else. Is it a crisis? Is it an emergency? What is it? And some people have these sort of rambly names for the sort of national security environment that we're in. So we have post 9/11 scholars backing away from the concept of wartime and peacetime, but maintaining this structure of normal time being ruptured and restored. And if you see history working that way, that there's normal time that gets ruptured and then we come back to normal time, then you can see war as something that's exceptional, that's a different kind of time, and that is by definition temporary. So what does that mean? As a matter of law and politics, it means that we see ourselves in this exceptional time when we're suspending regular law and politics. When bad things are going to happen, they always happen in war, but don't worry, it's going to go away. But if we really don't have these ruptures, and instead wartime is our normal time, and maybe wartime has been our normal time ever since the end of World War II, then the politics that we have during a time like this isn't wartime politics, it's our normal politics. So if we're going to have rights and liberties, they actually have to work in our time, right? Because it's not an exception that's going to go away, it's our time. That's the only time we have. If we're going to have democratic engagement and democratic limits on presidential war powers, they have to happen in our time because it's the only time that we have. My book essentially makes the argument that we're not living in a moment of exception. We're living in the only kind of time we will ever have, a time that when national security is an ongoing concern, and it will always be. And so if we're going to have rights, and if we're going to have democracy, and if we're going to have constraints on executive power, they have to happen in the kind of time that we have. And so essentially what we need is to have a dialogue, about how do we want American democracy to work now, not we can suspend the regular operation because at some point we're going to come back to that magical day of peacetime and then everything will work the way it's supposed to work again. That's a fantasy. It's never going to happen.